What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Pete's CD and Vinyl World. Today, just wanted to go over my top 10 David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar albums. So yesterday I did Van Halen Worst to Best video, and my buddy Brian from Vintage Audiophile made a comment about that he loved the David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar solo stuff. So I did too, so I guess I should just do a top 10 of their my favorite albums from them instead of doing a best to worst for both artists. Anyway, just wanted to give you Brian's YouTube channel. He's under Vintage Audiophile. So it's 2 words, Vintage space Audiophile. So check out his videos. He's got a lot of just rants and cool videos about some equipment, and he does vinyl also. Anyway, coming in number 10, Got the Dlr Band. So this came out, I believe, in the late 90s, and this has John 5 on guitar. Everyone seemed to love this album when it came out. The lead-off single, Slam Dunk, was very Van Halen-esque, and there's also a lot of other tracks like that. I think this was David Lee Roth's shot at Van Halen for not including him in a reunion at that time. If you remember, they did that Best of Volume 1 album with 2 new songs, and David Lee Roth thought they were going to do a tour and everything. So this was sort of his response, I think, to them. But over time, I don't think this album has aged as well. Over the years, it's just kind of like an okay album for me. Supposedly, they did record another album together, him and John 5, that supposedly is really good, and maybe that'll come out one day, but I don't actually think this ever came out on vinyl either, so yeah. Next one I'm going to do is David Lee Roth, A Little Ain't Enough. I think this came out in 1991. This was Roth's 4th release, if you count his EP. And definitely still continuing on with a sort of, I would say this is his most hair metal album. It was produced by Bob Rock. Also, Jason Becker plays guitar on here, who was a young shredder at the time. It turns out, at the end of this recording, he had ALS and unfortunately couldn't tour with David Lee Roth. And he's actually still alive and still making music. This album has a lot of good songs. A Little Ain't Enough, Hammerhead Shark, Drop in the Bucket, It's Showtime. So there's a lot of shredding, a lot of Van Halen-esque guitar playing on here. It's a pretty good pickup if you happen to see it. This was sort of the tail end of that hair metal era, so didn't get the attention it deserved, but still a pretty good album. Next up is Sammy Hagar's first album post Van Halen. That's Marching to Mars. I think this is a pretty good album overall. Production-wise, sounds really good. Guitars are pretty good. He has a lot of guests on here. In fact, Ronnie Montrose plays on a song on here that's really good. Not so heavy as much as his previous albums, but it definitely shows a different side of Sammy. He was always more of doing the acoustic stuff in Van Halen, so there's some songs on there. But overall, it's a good release. I don't think that a lot of the early Hagar albums, I'm saying everything previous to Standing Hampton, were overall great albums. I would say on those albums, half the songs were really good, half were just okay. So none of those really made my top 10. I think he had a lot of songs from that era. And so starting with Standing Hampton, to me, it really has that early, or the definitive Sammy Hagar sound. That's where he really became a hard rock artist. On those early albums, he was, some of it's even like folk, some of it's bordering on hard rock, some of it's more like Rick Springfield type. In fact, he wrote I've Done Everything for You for Rick Springfield. So as far as early Hagar, I recommend actually his 2 live albums, All Night Long and Live 1980. So moving on, we have his second release after Van Halen. This one's called Red Voodoo. And I like this one a lot better than Marching to Mars. It's a more focused album, and I think this is the album that he got his band settled, the Wabaritas, and he had a consistent band for a long time after this. This one has Mas Tequila, Red Voodoo, High and Dry, The Revival, Right on Right. So there's a lot of actually cool rockin' songs. This is sort of the beginning of him becoming sort of the Jimmy Buffett of hard rock, kind of. But it's definitely a good release. Next up, his 1983 album, Three Lock Box. Now, normally I probably would have put Standing Hampton in this place, but I think over time I like this one better. Standing Hampton obviously has a couple of killer songs. There's Only One Way to Rock, for example. But some of the other songs I think are just okay. I think I like some of the others on here better. Three Lock Box, Remember the Heroes, Your Love is Driving Me Crazy, I Don't Need Love. So I think this is a killer album. This is actually a white label promo I got at the Goodwill. And I think it was pretty much unplayed when I got it. So I was lucky to find this. Now we're down to the top 5, I believe, right. So next up is Sammy Hagar album 1013. This album came out in the early 2000s, or actually 2000. And I really think this is a really consistent album. And it's pretty balls to the wall rock from start to finish. It has the Wabaritas on it again. Shaka Doobie, the opening track, is a really cool song. I could have pictured this being a Van Halen song. Something after Balance, maybe. And not Shaka Doobie. I'm talking about Serious Juju. Sorry. Shaka Doobie's a cool opener. The Message, Deeper Kind of Love, is a song that I'm surprised hasn't been covered by somebody, either a rock artist or even a country artist. That song should have been a hit in sometime in the last decade or so. But yeah, this is a solid album from start to finish. Next up, I have David Lee Roth's second album, Skyscraper. Now, when this album came out, I think I got it on cassette first, and then I got it on CD a couple years later, and I was just never blown away by it. It still has the same band pretty much as the first album, Eat 'Em and Smile, but this one is way more produced and has a lot more keyboards on it. And, you know, the songs are really good from top to bottom, I would say, but I did not enjoy this album a lot until I got the vinyl, probably in this past year, and I never realized how good an album it was until I got the vinyl. I think I mentioned this on a previous video. But this, when you hear this on vinyl, you have more of a separation of the instrumentation, and I've grown to appreciate the songs on here a lot more over the years, so that's why I'm ranking it so high. Next up, I'm going to give you Hagar's VOA. This was probably his biggest solo album, I would think, ever. It's the one with I Can't Drive 55, Two Sides of Love, and VOA, I believe, was a minor hit. And this is the last album he released before joining Van Halen. Produced by Ted Templeman, actually, ironically. Not sure if this was produced before or after 1984. I think this must have came out later in 84. But, yeah, this is a good album from top to bottom. Next up is Sammy's album, I Never Said Goodbye. So this album, when Sammy joined Van Halen, Geffen Records released him from his contract with the understanding that he would record one more solo album. So he recorded this after 5150, and Eddie Van Halen produced it, and Eddie played bass on it. And this album I really like a lot. It's kind of unlike any of the other Hagar albums. It's not just strictly that corporate, cheese rock that Sammy's known for. There's a lot more deeper songs on here. and used various musicians on here besides Eddie. But it's funny because when this album came out, Hagar was definitive in pointing out that he played all the guitars on here. So the guitars are really good, actually, and it's a more mature album, I think, than any of his previous solo albums, and in a way, maybe even any more of his albums, sort of in line with Marching to Mars, maybe. Also, there's a great song called Winner Takes It All that was on a soundtrack to Over the Top at the time. That's not on this, but it's from the same sessions, I believe. I actually got this album before it was titled because they had a contest with MTV. Fans could write in and suggest a title for it. And, I think somebody came up with I Never Say Goodbye. So this is an early release that doesn't have the title on it. It was just called Sammy Hagar at the time. But this is a great album if you see it. And as my number one, I got to go with Eat 'Em and Smile here. So this is the first release post Van Halen for David Lee Roth. I mean, he did have that EP, Crazy from the Heat. And I was actually surprised with this album because that album came out, the EP came out, and it had California Girls and Just a Gigolo. Sort of a novelty EP. And I was worried that was the direction he was going to go in for the rest of his career. But then I saw the Yankee Rose video with that Steve Vai and Billy Sheehan and Greg Bassinet. And this is the best Van Halen album that never came out. So, this album is awesome from top to bottom. And this album is really raw. You could tell it was recorded live, just like Van Halen 1, which is a stark difference from Skyscraper, the second album from David Lee Roth. And say what you want about David Lee Roth. You hear his interviews and some of his... I don't know if you have ever seen some of his DVDs he put out in the last 10 years or so. I think some of the stuff's on YouTube. Just like crazy techno music with weird scenes. Totally unfocused. But, when he puts out albums, he really gets it together and knows what he wants to do. He's never really come out with a weird or crazy album. He's always done pretty much a solid rock album for all of his releases. Even the ones I haven't talked about here, like Your Filthy Little Mouth, the one that I think he had out recently, or this last one. So, yeah, definitely got to get that one if you're a Van Halen fan. I just wanted to also mention a couple of other projects that weren't solo albums from Hagar. This is HSAS. I believe this came out in either 83 or early... Yeah, it's listed as 84, so this must have been early 84 that this came out. Pretty sure this came out before VOA. But it's Sammy Hagar, Neil Schon, Kenny Aronson, and Michael Shreve on bass. So this album was a sort of a one-shot band. They recorded this album live, actually, and the audience was removed until the very end of the album. But it's got some really good songs on it. Top of the Rock, Missing You, and they do a great version of Whiter Shade of Pale on here. So if you ever pick this up if you see it. The other one, of course, is Chickenfoot. His band, it's been around for 10 years or so. They have two releases, this one and another one called Chickenfoot 3. There's no Chickenfoot 2, but this is a pretty solid album. It has Chad Smith on drums, Joe Satriani on guitar, Michael Anthony on bass. The only thing I don't like about this album is you can tell that Joe Satriani was holding back here. And they should have just let him rip, because if anyone could play like Eddie, it would probably be Satriani. Sexy Little Thing, Oh Yeah, My Kind of Girl. There's a lot of good songs on here, actually. It's a solid album. Definitely worth picking up if you see it. So, that concludes this episode. Please subscribe if you like these videos. Hopefully I'll have another video up this week. Maybe just talking about maybe audio files versus music files. There's been a lot of sort of debate about that I've been reading lately. So that's about it for today. Have a good night.